Ranking every game I have played, what could go wrong? This video was such a breeze to make, it only took a dozen rewrites, shedding like a collie and losing my sanity towards the end. And for what? A couple of hundred views? Totally worth it, I would say. Head over to my Patreon page if you'd like to help me recover, or don't, and I might end up like Bobby Fischer, without the brains of course. On second thought, that actually might be more entertaining. Number 94, Ride to Hell Retribution. I knew how bad this game was and that made me want to play it even more. A certain YouTube reviewer has one of the funniest reviews out there and I bought Ride to Hell thinking, it's so bad it might actually be good. Well, it's not. But it's goofy and over the top. I won't deny how much fun I had with the game, but it's still completely broken and an utter mess. But broken things are blessed, right? Number 93, Mafia 3. The drop-off in quality between Mafia 2 and Mafia 3 is about as much as classic Adam Sandler movies and grown-ups. For years I waited for a sequel to an excellent series only to be utterly disappointed. Mafia 3 is repetitive, boring, stale, and lacks any charm that made the series so special. The one part of the game that's any good is combat. Even that gets repetitive after a certain point. Number 92, Anthem. First became popular because of its similarity with Iron Man. Many even dubbed it as an Iron Man simulator. But like most EA titles in the last 5 years, it only buried the developers even deeper. It's a dumb game that'll surprise you with its stupidity, but one thing about Anthem is it's a boatload of fun. Flying around, for example, it's mindless fun until you get used to it. Combat is way too fast for my taste, there are so many things going on, and after any long sessions with the game, you get the same feeling you get when you're staring at a bunch of lights for a while. But in short bursts, it's a great game to end your day. It's fun and doesn't make you think all that much. Number 91, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It's the worst Assassin's Creed by a mile. It's not here nor there. It's not an Assassin's Creed game, neither is it a historically accurate game. At least that's what the experts say. The game world is beautiful, Norway with its diverse landscapes is stunning. The problem is the majority of the world is empty with nothing to do. Combat is meh, it's not bad, in fact it works really well, but it's not engaging nor is it fun. The more I play Valhalla, the less I like it. It's still a technically sound game that functions better than most, but in the current state of the gaming industry, that doesn't mean all that much. Number 90, Mass Effect Andromeda, another highly anticipated game that bombed harder than SpaceX's rockets. But for me, Andromeda is a so bad that it's good kind of game, especially cutscenes, faces with dead eyes, mouths that either don't move at all or move way too much. The actual gameplay isn't half bad. Rather than advising you not to pick it up, I would definitely recommend it to Mass Effect fans. Number 89, Far Cry 5. This is what happens when you refuse to let go of an idea that brought you success years ago. Far Cry 3 was released in 2012 and Far Cry 5 came out 6 years later, but nothing much has changed. But things have surely taken a turn for the worse. The protagonist is even duller than the previous game. That is a commendable feat on Ubisoft's part. The villain Joseph Seed is a vast wannabe. It was great the first time, alright the second, and utterly boring the third. The game plays like a Far Cry game and that's the only reason I can think of to play it. Ubisoft have near perfected the first person open world format. They have been working on one FPS game basically since Far Cry 3, tweaking them a little and releasing them as standalone games. And this installment surely won't disappoint you in the gameplay department if you liked all the other Far Cries. Number 88, Watch Dogs 2. Ubisoft ran away from everything the first one had. A serious tone, a brooding protagonist, a murky city, and being any good. Most of you loved these changes. I personally loved how Watch Dogs 1 felt. The sequel is much more happy-go-lucky, funny and silly, but in a game about how technology can be used against us, the lighter tone just doesn't feel right. Ubisoft have done more with hacking. They have included a few more gameplay elements to make hacking more important, which should have been the case from the start, but they could have done so much more. But I have no problems with the rest of the gameplay mechanics. Ubisoft very rarely miss with the actual gameplay, mostly because they aim low. Number 87, Assassin's Creed 1. For its time, the game was pretty unique. Nowadays, Assassin's Creed and unique don't even belong in the same book, but it wasn't the case back in the day. Assassin's Creed 1 was ambitious, the whole concept felt fresh. The execution, on the other hand, varies. Sometimes it works. Parkour, for example, was well done, but the mission structure was repetitive, stale, and frankly boring by the end. The ending to the story, though, is some of Ubisoft's best work. Number 86, For Honor. Ubisoft had a great concept with this one. If I was there when they were pitching For Honor, I would have jumped up and down with excitement. But the product that we got on our hands was not as impressive as it should have been. Vikings, knights, and samurais in one game. I go crazy for games with even one of those. The game in itself is good, but it could have been so much better. Ubisoft have designed a complex yet fun combat system. A multiplayer mode in this kind of game is rare, especially good ones. But I just feel they could have reached for more. If they do that in a sequel, if there is one, the game could be the benchmark for this genre. Number 85, Total Overdose. A mix of GTA, Max Payne's combat, Saints Row's over-the-top action, and Just Cause level of destruction. It's an incredibly silly game that isn't as popular as it should be. It also has a surprisingly good progression system where abilities are actually useful. But even just mucking about with the guitar gun, for example, I still don't know if there is a gun in the guitar case or the guitar is actually a gun. Anyway, there are plenty of these to keep you entertained. The game might look like a potato, but give it a chance. Number 84, Just Cause 2, an open world game that lets you blow anything and everything up. Just Cause 2 gives you the freedom to do whatever you want, but if you're a person who isn't creative when it comes to wreaking havoc, gamers aren't necessarily a creative bunch in general, it can feel a little shallow. While there are a few predetermined action sequences, the game relies more heavily on the player's creativity. The game world is a diverse, beautiful place that doesn't have much else to do other than cause chaos. RDR2 has a map with incredible diversity. Just Cause 2 is almost as rich in terms of varied, unique locations. While there aren't many interesting things to do, the game world is downright stunning. Number 83, Rise Son of Rome. One of the first Xbox One exclusives was surprisingly good considering every Xbox exclusive since then has bombed harder than D&D. It looked next gen, the lighting was great, shadows and textures were realistic, and most of all the gameplay is solid. I had a ton of fun battling my way through the game. Not the most replayable game out there, but it's definitely enjoyable the first time. Number 82, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The best looking Assassin's Creed game has some things going on for it. Ancient Greece has always had appeal, and when developers like Ubisoft, who are masters at building large but empty game worlds, are at the helm, it always ends up special. Likeable protagonists in Alexios and Cassandra are brilliant in their own ways. The world reacts to them differently, giving us two solid, unique experiences. The gender dynamics change, the tone changes. I would certainly recommend everyone play through the game twice to experience everything it offers. I know playing it twice isn't exactly easy, but still, Odyssey has a fantastic setting, engaging characters, but it feels too much of an Origins ripoff, which in itself felt like a Witcher 3 ripoff. The game doesn't feel original in the slightest. Gameplay is very much the same, mission structure hasn't changed, it feels like an Origins DLC set in Greece rather than standing on its own. Number 81, Hitman Contracts. Dubbed as Hitman 2.5, felt like a DLC to Silent Assassin. Don't get me wrong, the game is great, but that's because it borrows a lot from a better game while adding very few things of its own. I personally had a fantastic time with the game. Number 80, Rage 2. I first discovered Rage 2 in the middle of binging Cyberpunk 2077 videos. Both these games look similar, especially the desert part of Cyberpunk's game world looks identical in art design. Gunplay is what Rage 2 is about. Everything else, including exploration, can feel like a dud, but when you're running through an enemy camp, the game is very good. High-paced action, yet doesn't feel too much. It's slick with very few hiccups. The game is so fluid, it almost feels like a movie with rehearsed moves. Number 79, Watch Dogs Legion. It's considered to be the best Watch Dogs game, but I feel the game was a little overrated. A lot of mediocre games were released towards the end of last year, and Legion was a decent game in a sea of pretty average releases, so it looks a lot better than it really is. The game had a boring plot, playing as anyone didn't excite me as much. Legion, like all Watch Dogs games, played really well. Gameplay was the high point for me. Number 78. The Outer Worlds is a spiritual sequel to Fallout games and it manages to capture a lot of what made classic Fallout games special, and thank God it didn't take any inspiration from Fallout 76. RPG elements for one are really well done. The fact that you can take out any character in the game world might seem like a gimmick, but it has a huge impact on your journey. Taking out one character might completely change the course of your playthrough. For me, The Outer Worlds is a worthy spiritual sequel to Fallout 3 and New Vegas. Number 77. Hitman Codename. The first Hitman game had a ton of raw potential, but it's not as well put together as Silent Assassin. Codename introduced gameplay elements that have become synonymous with Hitman, so even if it's a little clunky, I still go back to it from time to time. Number 76. Assassin's Creed Revelations. The send-off to the first two assassins we met were still probably two of the more interesting protagonists in Creed games. While I like Altair's arc, it's Ezio's story that I connect more to. We first meet Ezio when he was no more than a boy in Assassin's Creed 2, but by the end of the trilogy, he's being compared to the legendary master assassin Altair, and rightfully so. He has grown that much, and we have been with him throughout his journey. Altair was already a legend in Assassin's Creed 1, so he was already at his peak. Gameplay is more of the same, but it's a must play for any fan of the franchise. Number 75. Far Cry 4. A semi-successful attempt at catching Far Cry 3's magic. Two fundamentally identical games. Yeah, some things are different. Ubisoft have reworked, put on some fancy filters to distract us. As I said, this was a successful attempt. It's almost as good, almost as interesting, and a great option if you want more of Far Cry 3. Number 74. Saints Row 3. A wacky, over-the-top open world game. I love Saints Row, both 3 and 4, but I think I like 3 a little more. In many cases, open world games start out with their own unique brand, but after a couple of installments, developers take a safer route of toning down what made them special, and they start feeling like GTA clones. But Saints Row is a rare breed. The games have gotten wackier and more over the top over the various releases. Saints Row 3 was immensely popular, and for a few years I considered it to be one of the best open worlds ever made. But revisiting the game now, I see a few cracks. I probably wouldn't even put it in a best open worlds list. Number 73. Crysis 3. It's known for being outrageously stunning. Without a doubt, one of the most graphically superior games of the PS3 Xbox 360 era. The game was built on the Cry engine, and I remember for a while everyone wanted every game to be built on it. The graphics might have got you to buy it, but the phenomenal first-person gameplay made you play it over and over again. Number 72. Hitman Absolution. Even though developers removed the thing that made Hitman games great, non-linear maps, Absolution is still a brilliant game. It's by far the most cinematic in the series. The plot is average, which is great by Hitman standards. The series always gave you freedom to try out outrageous ideas, but the actual gameplay has always been a little clunky. Absolution fixes that problem. The cover system, stealth mechanics, and even gunplay has been improved considerably. Linear maps offer less freedom, but they have given way to many action-filled sequences. The run for your life mission, for example. Absolution forces you to use less of your brain, and in general, I love those types of games. Number 71. Titanfall was one of the very first games to showcase the Xbox One's power. It's an online-only multiplayer game that is surprisingly good. It adds a few new twists in the age-old first-person genre. Titans bring something new, but without a single-player mode, I didn't last for more than 20 hours with the game. It's a solid game and will be more appreciated in the hands of someone who loves online multiplayer. Angry gamers in my ear aren't exactly my cup of tea. Number 70. Hitman 1. The rebooted series was something I was highly excited for. The episodic release structure put a fairly big dent on my excitement. I know they did it to encourage replayability, but I prefer to complete the entire game first before jumping into replays. Developers, please stop telling me how and when to play. Hitman 2016 was clearly inspired by Blood Money. Developers wanted to give that level of freedom, but in a much bigger scale because of technical advancements, and I would say they have succeeded in doing that. Each level is ginormous and each mission area is designed with replayability in mind. There are countless paths, assassination opportunities, and much more. The story is also classic Hitman in that it doesn't exist. To be fair, it exists, but its only job is to put the focus back on gameplay and act as bathroom breaks. Hitman 2016 is the prototype for the reboot. Each game since then has been getting better and bigger, so it's not the best one in the trilogy for me. Number 69, Far Cry 2. Some people consider it to be even better than Far Cry 3. I'm happy to say I'm not one of those people. This one has a more cult-like following, while Far Cry 3 appeals to everyone and their mother. Set in Africa, the game is just as exotic as its successors. It doesn't have an iconic villain, and the plot isn't particularly interesting. As a first-person open-world game, gameplay elements are top-notch, but in my opinion, it didn't have the X factor that Far Cry 3 did. Even then, I consider it to be head and shoulders above every other game in the franchise. Number 68, Max Payne 3. It wasn't as dark as the first two games. The typical Max Payne atmosphere isn't quite there. What is with developers removing the very thing that made their game successful? Max's narration is still captivating, but the tone of the rest of the game wasn't classic Max Payne. Gunplay has been overhauled, cool cinematic movements are aplenty. Max Payne 3 is a somewhat worthy installment in one of the coolest game franchises of all time. Number 67, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. I absolutely adore the combat in this game. It's brutal with gore-filled finishes. I love the brutality of combat so much that even with the option of stealth, I chose to go and battle it out like a warrior. That rarely happens to me in any game that has the option of sneaking around. The game is based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Games based on a high fantasy epic will never have a problem with lore or world building. The only thing to nail down is gameplay, and Shadow of Mordor does just that. Number 68, Splinter Cell Blacklist. The most recent entry in the series isn't my personal favorite, but it sticks to its roots while trying out a few new things. Traditional Splinter Cell gameplay elements like the emphasis on movement, light and darkness being a crucial part of stealth are back and better than ever. Blacklist is the first game in the series where if you decided to go in guns blazing, you felt satisfied. Maybe not as much as a Ghost playthrough, but satisfying nonetheless. Gunplay feels powerful, combined with slick movement, it's a lot of fun. Number 66, Alien Isolation. The game has a great soundtrack, level design with the sole purpose of building tension. I find jump scares moderately scary, but when a game takes its time and builds up anticipation, it's 10 times more scary, and that's exactly what Alien Isolation does. Games in the horror genre that give you sufficient means to protect yourself aren't all that scary. Alien Isolation doesn't have any hand-holding. It's one of the very few horror games that is actually scary. Number 65, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It felt like classic Creed games, but you can clearly see Ubisoft pushing in another direction, off a cliff to be precise. Combat is incredibly brutal, fitting the Victorian era with fistfights that will make you wince. Syndicate is the most modern Creed game, set in the 19th century, which means more guns in combat. That's not a change I love. Over the top stuff like grappling hooks were introduced, which was cool. I enjoyed exploration. London was recreated beautifully. Combine that with stunning visuals and exploring every burrow feels rewarding. Number 64, Hitman 2. The game takes you to some of the prettiest locations in the world. Couple that with excellent level design and just walking around becomes the best thing about the game. Most levels are masterfully designed to allow players to create their own paths and assassinations. It's not like the game only has one or two or three ways to assassinate your target. Most often there are dozens of unique ways. This leads to my next point. The game is one of the most replayable stealth games. Game devs intended for you to play each mission multiple times, hence the episodic nature of release in the first game, and thankfully it was thrown out for the sequel. Number 63, Assassin's Creed 3. It wasn't well received when it first came out. Over the years that has changed. The biggest complaint was the protagonist Connor. He wasn't as interesting as Ezio or Altair, but the game didn't deserve the level of hate. Even with all of its flaws, it's a lot better than recent Assassin's Creeds. I know that's not a high bar. Number 62, Fallout 4. One of the many derailed hype trains of the last few years. It was definitely not as good as its predecessors, but Fallout 4 combined with mods is a really fun game. Game developers depend on modders and not the other way around. The biggest letdown for me were the visuals. For a 2015 game, it looks average at best. The game world is what makes this game what it is. The mystery of not knowing what or who you'll run into is what Bethesda are great at, and they have delivered that part really well. Number 61, Cyberpunk 2077. It was supposed to be the greatest game ever made. Upon release, the game was bad, but people, myself including, were exaggerating how bad it really was. 6 months, countless patches, and updates later, CDPR have somewhat pulled everything together. The game has stepped up both performance and graphics, but the actual core of the game isn't as ambitious as it was advertised as. It's a good game, but other than lighting, I wouldn't say anything is out of the world. The game doesn't give you as much freedom as a good RPG should. The different parts are not so different from each other. Gameplay is rock solid and it's one of the best looking games period. Number 60, Immortals Phoenix Rising. It wasn't a popular release, but I tried it because of my love for the Greek mythology. I didn't expect much, but after a few cutscenes, I was completely hooked. Color palette is turned up with a lot of purple and yellow, making the game look like a literal fairy tale. Greek gods like Zeus are cracking silly over the top one-liners and being goofy. Immortals doesn't have pretentious characters and dialogues. It never takes itself too seriously. It's a comfort game that'll make you feel good. Number 59, Hitman 3. My favorite in the rebooted series. Is it as good as Blood Money or Silent Assassin? Not even close. Hitman 3 has a great collection of maps, even better than the originals. Every map is beautiful and unique. The series always had elements of social stealth, but it was combined with actual sneaking around. The recent ones have too much blending in with crowds for my taste, but Hitman 3 is by far the best running game in the series. It doesn't have the clunkiness of classic Hitman. Number 58, GTA 3, the game I consider to be the godfather of all modern open world games. The first 3D GTA game hasn't aged as gracefully as Vice City or San Andreas. It had a mute protagonist Claude. He has been overshadowed by iconic GTA protagonists CJ and Trevor or even Nico to the point where I had a real hard time recalling his name. The game might not be as polished as recent GTAs, but GTA 3 is still a very fun game if you aren't a shallow person and can look deep. Number 57, Tomb Raider 2013. I love Lara's journey throughout this game. It's her very first adventure, so she's still figuring things out throughout, unlike previous installments where she's basically a superhero. The game is great at instilling a sense of danger. We know she isn't going to die, even then, every time she's in a tough spot, there's that sense of danger. Number 56, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is an epic game. You know when you watch a savage movie or TV show with awesome choreography and instantly emulate that? Well, after watching a few medieval fantasies, I was craving for swords and epic boss fights, and Sekiro was the perfect game to quench my thirst. Boss fights are insane, one-on-one fights are super intricate and skill-based, and with stealth elements sprinkled in, it was perfect for me. Number 55, Marvel Spider-Man. A Spider-Man game that truly lets you do what a spider can. Web swinging should be the main focus in a Spider-Man game because that's what makes him unique. It's definitely not combat. There are many who can run on walls, but only one superhero can swing off webs across New York. Talking about New York, Insomniac Games have done an outstanding job in recreating New York. It's so beautiful and the lighting is just out of the world. When you're swinging across the city in the midst of a sunset, the game is breathtaking to say the least. Number 54, Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. A game that's always on. There are slow sections, but the next mega action set piece is always around the corner. Missions are very creative. Sink or Swim was my personal favorite. Combat is fast paced. You can't just sit behind a cover and take everyone out. You have to constantly move, find new angles, and form plans on the fly. Gunplay is the right amount of challenge and fun for the most part. Some missions will make you want to throw the controller at the screen, but remember, there are kids in Africa who don't get to play Uncharted. Number 53, Watch Dogs. Hear me out. Graphical downgrades and a few bugs should be criticized. But if you didn't know anything about the game and you played for the first time without any context, do you really think you'll still hate it? The game was a disappointment, not because it was a bad game. It was a disappointment because it didn't live up to our expectations. I have replayed the game countless times because of its gameplay. When it works like it's supposed to, it's fluid. Everything from parkour to combat flows really well together. Gunplay especially is extremely satisfying. Ubisoft have made mediocre game after mediocre game, but Watch Dogs isn't one of them. Number 52, Dishonored 2. I played Dishonored 2 like a stealth game. I feel it's the best approach to experience the brilliance of the game, but the game has a variety of ways to go about any mission. Magic and a first person perspective add a lot of situations that are completely unique to Dishonored. Number 51, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. I'm normally not a fan of FPS games. The majority of them feel like headless chicken running around with weapons. I have played a few Call of Duties and I mix them up a lot, but this one was quite distinct and memorable. Well written characters were a big reason. Modern FPS games have bland characters that only exist to tell you what to do, but not the original Modern Warfare. Gameplay was great, but that's not the main high point, at least for me. Iconic characters involved in iconic missions is what Modern Warfare is all about. Number 50, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. I haven't played it for a solid decade, but I do remember how much I enjoyed the game. I also recall spending half the game wearing night vision goggles. When I form a mental image of Chaos Theory, it's with a green tint. Like most Splinter Cell games, Sam moves incredibly well. You feel like he can go anywhere and do anything. Number 49, Assassin's Creed Origins. Origins was the game that took the series in a completely different direction. RPG elements were added. The series had a bit of progression here and there, but Origins has full-fledged progression, where you're constantly looking to level up. Ubisoft shouldn't have taken this approach. They should have either created a new IP or stuck to the classic Assassin's Creed approach. All that being said, Origins has a lot of great things going on for it. The game is set in Egypt, one of the more exotic locations in the world. Ubisoft have done an outstanding job crafting such a beautiful game world, a likable protagonist who makes the game 10 times more memorable. Origins is very grounded when compared to its peers. The concept is not great at all, but by some miracle, Ubisoft have managed to make a good game. Number 48, Sleeping Dogs. A very underrated open world game that manages to stand out in a sea of GTA wannabes. It's set in Hong Kong, which brings a completely different atmosphere from others in this genre. The emphasis on melee combat is a real highlight. Lackluster fist fighting has been a problem in most modern open worlds. Sleeping Dogs has a brutal combat system consisting of strikes and grappling. Environments also play a factor in combat. You can slap someone with a fish or drive them through a refrigerator. Sleeping Dogs is a Jackie Chan movie in game form. From epic hijacking where you jump on a moving car's roof to shirtless fights, the game is epic in so many ways. Number 47, Horizon Zero Dawn. If a game was made by an 11-year-old boy, it would look like Zero Dawn. Cool killing robots, what's better than that? Well, dinosaurs. Let's combine all of that and put them in a beautiful game world. The story wasn't really memorable and I found most characters to be alright, but none of them were standouts. But Zero Dawn has a cool concept and developers have executed those ideas really well. Combat is fun yet challenging at the same time, and awesome features like climbing on top of a tall neck are what games were made for. Number 46, one of my first ever games. Doom is a first person shooter. The game doesn't really have any story, but god the game was addictive. Finishing a level multiple times just to do it a little faster, to the point where I memorized the whole layout. I have a lot of fond memories like that with the game. Number 45, Deus Ex Mankind Divided. The first game in the series is considered to be the best, but Mankind Divided is my only experience, and I think it's pretty great. It's a unique stealth game, stealth combined with augmentations, which are basically super cool upgrades. A meaningful progression system in a stealth game is as rare as Ubisoft releasing a good game, and Deus Ex pulls it off pretty well. I was constantly checking and pushing towards the next augmentation. Due to these augmentations, gameplay is over the top at times, but it's a welcome spin in the stealth genre. Number 44, a franchise with a cult-like following and the best game in that series, Counter-Strike Global Offense. It's a great game to play with your friends, but my experience playing online multiplayer was not all that great. The lack of a single-player campaign also hurts, but as a pure first-person shooter, gameplay mechanics are on point. Number 43, Bloodborne. A game in the fan-created Soulsborne genre consisting of games that are so hard you will rip your hair off but keep playing with an unnatural amount of rage. The atmosphere of Bloodborne is something truly special, a dark gothic world full of creatures waiting to slash at you. The most enjoyable or most frustrating part of the game, depending on your skill, are boss fights. You will die multiple times, but conquering the enemy at last is the most satisfying thing you can feel while holding a controller in hand. Number 42, a game I thought I would end up hating, but it won me over, Destiny 2. Before I tried the game, I didn't find the appeal in grinding for days on end to get one piece of better gear. Gunplay looked great, so I gave it a try. Combat was so fluid and powerful that I always wanted more. I have tried plenty of games that are inherently about grinding, and I hated almost all of them. But Destiny 2's gameplay felt so rewarding that I ended up grinding for more powerful weapons and cool looking gear. Number 41, Metal Gear Solid 1, the first true Metal Gear Solid game in my book, has one of my favorite boss fights. The battle with Psycho Mantis was so creative and ahead of its time. I still remember how mesmerized and amazed I was when I found out how to defeat Psycho Mantis. For a very serious game, the original Metal Gear Solid has some really silly over-the-top dialogues. Throughout the game, there were several conversations where I was like, he did not just say that. But I didn't care about the characters or conversations the first time I ever played it because I couldn't understand anything really. Yet I was constantly seeing the game with a sense of wonderment. Number 40. Max Payne 1 has a unique tone and feel. Like its sequel, the game is very intense with dark colors all over the place. Not the game I would play if I was depressed. Every time I play either one of the first two Max Paynes, I'm filled with dread. Gameplay has the coolness factor going on for it, a unique game that will certainly leave an impact on you. Number 39, Metal Gear Solid 4, one of the best narratives in a stealth game. The game has a few new additions to gameplay, mainly the once pure stealth series now lets you choose your approach. Gameplay is incredible, stealth fans will thoroughly enjoy it, but the story going on is what I remember the most. Of course, playing the first few installments is required to get everything going on, but if stealth is your main focus, it can't get much better than this. Number 38, Mafia 1. It's one of the very few open world games that doesn't feel like a GTA copy. It's much more intense, it has a better story than Mafia 2 in my opinion, but I like Vito more than Tommy. With unforgettable missions that we relived in HD in the past year, like that racing mission, gameplay is not the most polished, even taking in account its release date. That's the big issue you will face if you try the original game now. The remastered version is great, but it doesn't have the same charm the original one had. Maybe that's just nostalgia. Number 37, Assassin's Creed Rogue. Rogue and Unity were released in the same year, so Rogue was completely overshadowed by Unity. But even years later, the game rarely gets appreciated or even mentioned. The plot adds a unique twist in the traditional Assassin vs Templar story. A lot of gameplay mechanics are borrowed from Black Flag, but the game feels unique. While Black Flag is set in the hot Caribbean, Rogue has one of the best stories in the Creed universe and has great gameplay to take you through it. Number 36, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. A ton of cutscenes were cut and the story was kind of unfinished, and there was a lack of cutscenes throughout the game. Venom Snake barely speaks and the idea to go open world was mostly a failure. But as I've said countless times, when you get to the mission area, the game is near perfect. There are a gazillion ways and means to go about any mission. Each style feels complete. If you took the guns blazing style in Hitman games, it feels wrong. But no matter what path you take in Phantom Pain, you'll feel just as rewarded and satisfied. Number 35, Batman Arkham City. Batman games don't get better than this. It has one of the best melee combat systems and combine that with stealth and the coolness factor of being Batman, and it deserves to be in the top 50 games of all time. Number 34, Hitman Blood Money. This was the perfect Hitman game. It isn't my favorite, but it has everything that made Hitman so great. Sandboxes that allow extreme freedom, opportunities for creative assassinations, and fun, brilliant gameplay mechanics. A coin could be used for distraction. Well, that's simple, but it can also be tossed on a glass ceiling only to fall on the target below to complete your job. The game is filled with chances to be as creative as possible, and not only does the game allow you to use your smarts, it rewards it. Number 33, Grand Theft Auto 4. I never connected with the game like I did with San Andreas or 5. I didn't like Nico as a protagonist and didn't care much for the story either. All that being said, all the trademark GTA stuff, causing chaos in the streets or just free roaming, the game is typical GTA quality. I didn't find the plot to be intriguing, but the actual missions were still a huge amount of fun. Number 32. This was a tough pick purely because I adore every single Tomb Raider game I have tried, but Tomb Raider Legend is the game that sticks out as the best. I like Legend's art design more than its prequels. The first few games looked way too cartoony, clearly aimed at teenagers, Legend has adopted a more realistic look, which I think suits the game more. Puzzles were great, but I loved the action even more. Number 31, Borderlands 3 is a loot and shoot game. Normally I don't get obsessed with grinding for gear, but Borderlands had deep customization with a godly amount of things to tweak, improve and upgrade. The game also is hilarious. Conversations rarely fail to crack me up. These back and forths alone make the game good, but the best part is combat. Running around using all these fancy weapons hasn't ever felt boring. Number 30, Kingdom Come Deliverance. It is a little rough around the edges, but it's a phenomenal game. It isn't the most polished game out there, but it more than makes up for it with its brutal realistic game world and gameplay. Welcome to a medieval world where you aren't a knight, a dragon slayer, a mutant. Nope, you're a peasant, a blacksmith's son with very little training. The first few hours of the game do a great job in establishing what type of game this is. You will regularly get beat up, but after hours of getting beaten up, when you finally win, it's so very satisfying. If you're tired of high fantasy and want something that captures the danger and suffering of the Middle Ages, Kingdom Come Deliverance is the perfect game for you. Number 29 is a controversial pick among gamers, but Assassin's Creed Unity is an awesome game in my opinion. Even at the peak in terms of bugs and glitches, I thoroughly enjoyed the game. For one, it boasts a stunning lighting engine. I can think of maybe 2 games that are downright better in the lighting department. That's quite an achievement for a game that's almost 7 years old. Gameplay is classic Assassin's Creed. A compact map cluttered with buildings is an excellent playground for parkour and creative assassinations. Unity has an above average narrative, nothing special really, but among all the bugs and glitches, the jaw-dropping visuals and fun gameplay mechanics get overlooked. Thankfully, gamers finally seem to come around and realize how good this game really is. Number 28, Fallout New Vegas. The last great Fallout game. It's very similar to Fallout 3, but that's not a bad thing. Combat is good, could have been a little better, but role-playing mechanics are on point. It's an extremely replayable game. The actual gameplay is a tad outdated, but if you are even a little bit into role-playing games, you'll look past it. Number 27, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. I played it after I finished Uncharted 4, so anything after that game should pale in comparison, right? Nope. Among Thieves is just as exhilarating. In the first chapter, you are hanging on a train, hanging off a cliff. Naughty Dogs have managed to pull off all these amazing action sequences on a machine with just 256 MB of RAM. That's just insane. Number 26, L.A. Noire. I have been a fan of detective movies, stories and games for as long as I can remember. When I first got a glimpse of L.A. Noire, I couldn't wait to try it. Interrogation elements excited me a little too much, I must admit. When I finally got my hands on the game, I loved it just as much as I thought I would. Walking around crime scenes looking for clues, questioning witnesses, and the brilliant interrogation system the game has is the icing on the cake. Suspects give out subtle facial cues for you to work with. The remastered version does this even better. The game could have allowed for more freedom when it comes to solving cases. That's the only improvement I want to see in a sequel, if there is ever one. Number 25, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Full disclosure, I have only played bits and pieces of other Zelda games, but I finished Breath of the Wild multiple times. I avoided games that look like anime for a long time. I know that's dumb, and this was the first game I decided to try. Barring a few frustrating gameplay mechanics, I had a ton of fun exploring and combat. I normally find puzzles in open world games to be tedious, mainly because my brain hates working, but most of the puzzles in Zelda were really engaging. Number 24, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. This is an unpopular opinion in the Metal Gear community, but in my opinion, Snake Eater is the best in the series. The game is set during the Cold War. The setting and environments are what makes the game so enjoyable for me. Sneaking through a forest just feels special. The ambience and visually the game isn't half bad either. At number 23, my favorite first-person shooter game, Call of Duty Black Ops. As I've said, I've never been a fan of FPS games. I haven't even played most of the recent installments. Out of all the ones I have played, Black Ops is my favorite. The single player campaign set in the 60s is great, but the multiplayer is what made me fall in love. It's actually fun playing with other humans, surprisingly. At number 22, Ghost of Tsushima. This is one cool game. For the first 20 hours, I felt like it was the best game ever. but as I played more and more, the shine wore off. Those stunning sceneries didn't wow me as much. The same goes for combat. The first few fights I was jumping up and down. After a few dozen hours, not so much. A pretty forgettable narrative combined with not so many great characters is why it's at number 21. Gameplay wise, it's among the best. Crisp and fluid and brutal and cinematic. It's off the charts in the style department, but doesn't quite match up when it comes to substance with games above it. It's still a brilliant game, but I didn't end up loving it as much as I thought I would. At number 21, Max Payne 2. The Max Payne franchise was so popular back in the day, but it completely fizzled out in the last few years. Anyway, Max Payne 2 is a very cinematic game. Those slow motion dives while shooting up an entire alley is still some of the coolest things I've done in a game. The tone in general is very dark. I can't remember much of the story, but I do remember how much I loved the combat in this game. Looking back, the game looks great for being released in 2002. At number 20, Mass Effect 2, a role-playing game where you take control of Commander Shepard. If you just look at RPG mechanics, the game is top tier. I can think of 2, maybe 3 games that are better at being an RPG. Third-person combat is definitely better than the first, but it's still not as satisfying as some of its peers. But that's not where the game shines. It's all the different minor and major story paths, almost every dialogue option and choice has a consequence. One small line of dialogue can completely change the course of your playthrough. That alone makes Mass Effect 2 so replayable. This kind of game isn't exactly my cup of tea, yet I have replayed it completely twice and a few other playthroughs where I just tried stuff out. At number 19, Assassin's Creed 2. The game captures what Assassin's Creed is all about. An exotic, well-made game world, a likable protagonist, running around buildings, fun missions like flying around in a machine built by Leonardo da Vinci, savage assassinations and an interesting plot. Ezio is a huge reason for this game's popularity. Gameplay might be basic, but everything else is brilliant. At number 18, we have Mafia 2. While I loved the first one, Mafia 2 is my favorite in the series. I have always thought of Mafia as GTA's gritty older brother. GTA games are goofy and over the top. Mafia games are much more grounded and real. The game had a fun, brutal melee system, functional gunplay, and alright driving mechanics. The charm is definitely the plot. A look inside organized crime full of scheming and backstabbing. It also boasts a fantastic ending. The game just feels real, if you get what I mean. Coming in at number 17, The Witcher 2, an underrated gem. The game was an enormous improvement from the first one. Visually one of the prettiest games of the Xbox 360 era. CDPR were ambitious from the start, but The Witcher 2 is when they started executing. Combat is a lot less clunky, it's more refined and responsive. While the game isn't an enormous open world like its successor, it's just as large in a sense. Cutscenes are very enjoyable, siding with characters have meaningful changes on your path, and the overall story is pretty good too. Coming in at number 16, The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. The game has a completely different vibe from Skyrim, but it's almost as good. I played it a solid decade after it was released and still found most gameplay mechanics and visuals to be relevant. Oblivion has some really distinguished parts, your character is very customizable, and the choices you make affect the game world around you. At number 15, we have GTA Vice City. It often gets overshadowed by San Andreas and 5. Anyway, Vice City is Scarface made into a quality game. It's set in the mid-80s in Vice City, a city based on real-life Miami. GTA 3 and Vice City are very similar in terms of look and feel, but this game world was more immersive. I could drive anywhere without looking at a map. When I think of Vice City, I think Tommy, the city itself, and then the RC helicopter mission. Oh my god, that was a test of patience. San Andreas had a mission similar to this one, but for some reason, this mission is etched in my memory deeper. Coming in at number 14, God of War PS4. In recent years, developers have stuck on to the idea that a game must either be a massive open world or an online multiplayer game to be successful. God of War wasn't either. It wasn't even a particularly long game, but it was of the highest quality, a father-son adventure with a lot of puzzles, enemies of all shapes and sizes, and a lot of axe throwers. And did I mention the game looks like a dream? Treasure your first playthrough and please don't rush through it. At lucky number 13, we have Fallout 3. The green tinted wasteland is iconic and for good reason. Role-playing games have always been about creating your own path, but very few games do that better than Fallout 3. Progression is as RPG as it gets. With so many skills to improve, each player will have a very different skill set, allowing for very different playthroughs. Coming in at number 12, a one-of-a-kind game. Gamers have been clamoring for a sequel for 15 years. Bully is such a unique game. Most of Rockstar's games are controversial, but Bully topped them all. I don't even need a sequel, just give me a remake. If Rockstar worked on making it technically superior while making the game look like a 2021 game, Bully will surely end up in the top 5. It's such a fun game, but it gets overlooked in between the more popular Rockstar titles. At number 11 we have Uncharted 4, a technical wonder. That chase alone is probably the most impressive 15 minutes technically. Naughty Dogs pulled that off in the early years of the PS4. Many games have looked as good or better since then, but to look that good and run that well is a pretty great achievement. That sequence is exhilarating, but it's not like there is just one of them. It's the best among them for sure, but action set pieces are littered throughout the game. If 10 years ago someone asked me how games would look in the future, I would have imagined something very close to Uncharted 4. Coming in at number 10, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I wasn't a fan of high fantasy RPGs when I first played Skyrim, so I didn't consider it to be a top 10 game back then. But years later, a show and another high fantasy RPG gave me the fantasy bug. Then I played Skyrim again, only this time the playthrough lasted a few hundred hours. I know that's rookie numbers compared to some of you, but that playthrough made me realize how good and wonderful Skyrim really is. The game world is the main protagonist with unique things to do in every corner. At number 9 we have the original Red Dead Redemption. Most of you will feel this game deserves the highest spot, but I just didn't love it as much. I still think it's a very well made game. John Marston is a well written character, and the end to his character is one of the most cinematic, tragic and tear-jerking moments in gaming. The game is absolutely beautiful. Like most Rockstar games, gameplay is not built to be fancy as much as it's designed around being fun. Coming in at number 8, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I'm surprised by how far up the list I have put Black Flag, but I think it deserves to be in the top 10. First off, the game is unique. I mean, how many good pirate or games with a naval aspect are there? The map is huge, finding new islands and exploring them is a treat. So many things to do and see. For example, going after whale is one of my favorite things to do. Other gameplay elements are solid, nothing out of the world, but they are good enough. At number 7, we have a game both critically acclaimed and well received by gamers. The Last of Us Part 1 is an emotional roller coaster. The game doesn't have fancy gameplay elements or gimmicks. A gut-wrenching and sometimes heartwarming story filled with remarkable writing. The relationship between Joel and Ellie is something. The quips and banter between them give you something to chuckle about in an otherwise grim world. The game starts strong and ends even stronger. At number 6 we have GTA 5. The game is immensely popular but doesn't get the appreciation it deserves. It's almost considered a casual game, not something real gamers would play. If you remove all the hype and look at the game objectively, you'll see how brilliant it really is. Gunplay is great. With so many weapons, it's impossible to get bored, blowing stuff up in thousands of ways. Driving is good enough to not stick out. Anytime two or main characters hang out, it's impossible not to laugh and have fun. Most of the cutscenes are downright hilarious. I can think 5 off the top of my head. Grand Theft Auto 5 has suffered from having a mainstream appeal. As bizarre as it sounds, it's looked down upon by gamers solely because of that. At number 5 we have Far Cry 3, the best game Ubisoft have ever made and probably will ever make. Ubisoft are masters at building amazing game worlds. Rook Islands is a dangerous pirate-infested island with reptiles like Komodo dragons and apex predators like tigers roaming around. The game has one of, if not the most iconic villain in gaming, Vaas, a crazy, unpredictable but charismatic character. The game looks fantastic even now and gameplay is brilliant as well, giving you an unbelievable amount of options to do literally anything. You could glide your way if you're tired of walking, you could be sneaky if you're tired of bullets flying everywhere. At number 4 we have GTA San Andreas. Better looking games have come out, more technical, more ambitious, but no game has managed to give me so many great memories with it. Anytime I play San Andreas I feel so good. And it's not just the memories, the game objectively is good. San Andreas had 3 cities that felt very different from each other. Even today that's tough to pull off. The game came out in 2004 with hilarious characters, downright crazy missions and scandals. gunplay, and driving are a little outdated at this point. The game has managed to stay relevant 17 years later, mostly because of how great it is and maybe a little because of a few memes circulating the internet. Coming in at number 3, we have Red Dead Redemption 2. It was overhyped and overpromised. That usually is a sign of impending doom, but RDR2 exceeded the already high expectations. Rockstar have a habit of releasing masterpiece after masterpiece, but RDR2 demolishes every single one of them in terms of quality. The game looks outstanding, plays even better, but for me, Arthur Morgan is one of the biggest reasons for the game's success. Yeah, it's a little slow for some, but even they won't deny how good the game is. This will surprise a lot of you, but at number 2, we have Hitman 2 Silent Assassin. This was my first introduction to stealth, so this one game is responsible for my obsession with the genre. It's one of the most ambitious, creative games, especially considering when it came out and the hardware that was available. I have replayed every mission countless times and I still get the kick out of it. If I could name one game to be remade, it's definitely this one. If you want to dabble in stealth and don't know where to start, this is the game for you. And the best game I have ever played is The Witcher 3. When I first picked up the game, I got to the Skellige part, I got bored, and for a year I didn't touch the game at all. What I had done wrong was that I played it on the easiest difficulty without paying any attention to alchemy or crafting. Then a year later, I set the difficulty on Death March and incorporated alchemy, crafting and mutagens, collecting Witcher gear, and I finished the game in 3 weeks. And ever since then, it has been my pick for the greatest of all time. That was a wild ride, going through all those games I played and memories I created with them. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you watched the entire video, thanks a lot. Sparing almost an hour, even though time isn't as valuable as it was a year ago, it's still a big deal and means a lot. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you liked this video. Have a great day wherever you are.